all you cool cats and space cowboys. It's time for Cosmic Tea with your host, Avalon Starlight.
All right, Cosmic Tea, magical humans. I've got somebody super special on the podcast today. I read her bio, and when it said Economist turned numerologist, I was like, W2TF, we're going to have to lean into that a little bit. But I actually met today's guest in a community that I participate in, and her ability to show up raw, real, and vulnerable and share the inner workings of her life so intimately and deeply has just touched my soul. Not to mention that I have a massive girl crush on your IG account. I can't even, it's so beautiful, so clear, so majestic, so magical. I'm just really excited to have you on the podcast today. Meaghan, welcome.
Thank you. Oh my gosh. I think I need to listen to this clip on a regular basis because thank you.
Seriously though, I want to know all, there's people that I haven't met yet that I know from groups that I'm just man, I can't wait till I can sit down and have a deep dive with them about who they are, how they landed where they are, where they started, what their journey's been. And you have been one of those people for me, right? I see you on these week-to-week calls when we drop in together, but we've never had a chance to get to know each other. So the first question that I have for you is, why numbers?
Why numbers? It's funny because I don't know that I sought it out. I sort of feel it sought me out. And it started out as an obsession with business and money. When I was a kid, I was super into business, super into money. And at a young age, 12 years old, I had developed 3 streams of income, because I was so passionate about money and finance, because in my little mind, money equaled freedom. So I was I want to have access to money. I want to know how money works because I want freedom. And so I went on to study business. I earned a business degree and a master's degree in economics. And that was my initial drive to make sense of it, because I had this perception that people who understood how money worked kind of had this cheat sheet on life. Right? They kind of had something figured out that gave them a sense of power and a sense of freedom. And so looking back now, I'm it wasn't so much the numbers, it was freedom and power that were really driving me. Right. And then from there, it kind of evolved because I studied business, I studied economics. I used to work for the provincial government forecasting revenue for the budget. So when the private, I know, right? It's the craziest thing.
Especially because we're in a community for super spiritual people, traveling to galactic places. So you know what I mean? It's the history is so amazing.
It is. It's really interesting. And I was never, I always think it's important to tell this part, is I was never one of those people who knew anything about spirituality, who had any sense of intuition, who had you hear these stories of oh, I knew I was intuitive when I was, a kid, or I had these imaginary friends and it turned out they were guides. No, none of that. I didn't have any of that.
So I have my first question, which is at 12 years old, when your mind is 3 income streams, was this something you witnessed with your family? Was there somebody who you were oh, my parents were entrepreneurs, or somehow that's how it came to be? Or was it just the way your mind worked?
It was basically the way my mind worked. My mom was a stay-at-home mom and my dad was a teacher. He taught business and entrepreneurship, so that definitely would have planted a bit of a seed. But we had a big family. There was 4 kids, so it was a family of 6, and my dad was a teacher. So we grew up in this kind of rural part of the Okanagan. We had a hobby farm where we worked really, really hard in the summertime. And when I was really little, we had a peach orchard. And so I worked really, really hard on the peach orchard as a kid. And, it sounds very idyllic. And in some ways, I guess it was. But when I was a kid, it was hard work. And I saw my other friends going to the pool and going to the water slides and spending time at the beach. And I was oh my God, I'm doing farm chores. I want to go to the beach. And so I just had this feeling of how do you get freedom? How do you get to choose that? How do you get to be I'm choosing not to work right now because I want to go play, but I have set myself up in such a way that I can choose that, you know?
So just a little side story. When I was young, I worked for a summer on a peach farm, and that shit's for real. And I was covered in peach fuzz all the time, and it was itchy as Heckersville. So I honor that was when your friends are at the beach, I'd be like, to watch off the peach fuzz.
It's itchy and it's hot in the Okanagan in the summertime, which I love. But when you're working, it's like, oh my gosh.
Then I can't help but, how do you go
Yeah.
from working in the province in like working in their revenue and their numbers, which is a pretty standard, like non-spiritual job. Let's just put that out there, right? Like, I just think of like, this is the muggle job.
Yeah. Fully.
Over to alchemizing numbers and numerology for spiritual businesses and business entrepreneurs to maximize efficiency and like magic in their business.
Yeah. Well, it was a full-on muggle job, like for sure. But one of the things I didn't really understand about myself was that numbers always made sense to me. Right. And I realize now that when I was in school, when I was a student, when I was working, I could sort of feel number patterns in ways that we're never taught to look at numbers. And so that's why I don't think I noticed it. Right. It's like this whole idea of if you've never been taught or explained that something's possible, sometimes it's not possible for you just because you don't see it. Right. It's a blind spot. But then as soon as someone said to me at one point, like, you just kind of get it. Like you can feel the numbers in different ways. You can see them in different ways. They make sense to you. You're really good at like having this like holistic understanding of numbers. And, you know, total dork nerd alert. But when I was in university, we used to have to do matrix algebra by hand, which is like working with multiple dimensions of numbers and doing math like manually by hand. Now I think you probably use a computer to do that, but we used to have to do it by hand. Maybe you still have to do it by hand. I don't know. But it was something that I loved, how there's always a process, there's always a step-by-step, and there's always an answer. And that just always fit really well to me, right? And then, you know, in terms of me recognizing there's something more to it than the like analytical logic, it all happened when I got pregnant with my first child. I have 3 children. So when I was 29 years old, I got pregnant with my eldest, and all of a sudden I started knowing things, and I would be like, how do I know this? And then I would go research it, and I'd be like, wow, sure enough, it's true, or there is a body of work around it, or there's literature on this. And I'd go about asking my friends, like, have you guys ever heard of this? Have you ever heard of this? And everyone would be like, no idea what you're talking about. And I'm like, where's this coming from? Right? Where is this coming from? And so that's when I started to be like, I need to learn what intuition is. I need to learn what it means to work with energy, interpret energy, make sense of energy. And that was kind of like a side note, right, to my work as an economist.
So first of all, I just want you to know I had a vision of like Stephen Hawking's brain when you were talking about being in university and like doing that like quantum matrix algebra. I think that's what you called it. So I'm just curious, just like offhand, like thinking about this little entity, this little consciousness coming into your being, and all of a sudden this knowing or this intuition coming into place. 2 kind of things come to mind. Do you think he was an activation for you, and B, is it was your son?
It was my daughter. Mm-hmm.
Okay, your daughter. So then is your daughter intuitive? Like, did she bring that energy into your world?
You know, it's really interesting. My oldest, her and I have very similar numerology charts and very similar personalities, according to numerology. And she is the one who resists me and my ideas and things the most. So, you know, if you were to ask her, she would be like, no, I don't know what you're talking about. And mom, that's so embarrassing, right? She's 13 now. But she is very sensitive, and she can pick up on stuff in ways that sometimes I have no idea. Like her attunement to the energetics around her is brilliant, right? And so I do feel like in some ways it was an activation because this little being came to be and chose me to be her mom. But then I also think, so she brought that, but then I also think there was a part of me that almost like a switch was turned on. Right. And like, to me, it was like motherhood, but I mean, obviously there's so much more to it than that.
Totally.
Mm.
And so you started to see, and for all the listeners here, and I'm just going to reiterate part of your story, it was so natural to you what you could do in seeing the patterns that you didn't even think it was a thing, right? And I want you guys to hear that, because I always say, like, our biggest gift is often we're like, what do you mean that's my gift? When I'm working with my clients, which you probably have the same thing happen with yours. You're like, oh, but it's this thing. And you're like, but everybody can do this. And you're like, no, not everybody can do that. And then it's like that, oh, aha moment, right? The thing that's super easy for you that you just don't even have to try doing. That's the thing. That's totally the thing. So then so like when I say I have a girl crush on your Instagram, I follow everything that you're doing and how you show up for business owners and such. And so how do you tie in numerology to actually supporting people figure out how to be a better business person?
Well, so after I had my daughter, I was living in Edmonton at the time, and I didn't want to raise her in Edmonton. So when my maternity leave came up, I moved back to the Okanagan, which is where I grew up. And that's where I wanted to raise her. So I started looking for work in the Okanagan, and there wasn't a lot of work for economists in the Okanagan. Like, there just wasn't. And working remotely back then wasn't as common as it is now. So I started working for the health authority and doing kind of budget stuff for the health authority, but I didn't love it. Right? Like, I went into economics because I cared about economic growth. That was my passion. That was the area of focus I focused on. So it was like, what are the aspects that can grow an economy? What are the aspects that can make people better off? That was the area of economics I studied. So when I went into work for a health authority, I was like, oh, this isn't fulfilling me. And so I started a coaching practice on the side where I coached small businesses on the side of my corporate gig. Bearing in mind, I had a toddler at the time, and my ex-husband worked out of town all the time. So I was basically the sole care provider for my child. So here I am working full-time in a corporate position, side hustling as a business coach, and raising a toddler. It was a kind of a recipe for chaos, but this is something that I love, because when we're in the chaos, we don't realize the birthing that comes from it. And so in that pressure of the chaos, I went to my boss and I was like, can I work a compressed work week? Can I work flex time? I will do all of my duties in a shorter work week. Like, give me Fridays off, give me this. And my boss kept saying no. And finally, I felt like I was kind of backed into the corner, and I was like, okay, then I guess I quit. And so I quit and decided to be a business coach full time. And that was the only skill set that I could really think to, being I understand the economy, I understand business, so I'll be a business coach. And so that's what I did initially. But I was still going on this, journey on the side to understand intuition and energy. And I started doing my clients' numerology charts kind of behind the scenes, like totally on the down low. And then it would inevitably come up in their coaching where they would ask me, marketing advice or whatever. And I would say, well, this is the style that's more suited to you. Try this and see what happens. And they would be like, wow, this works. How are you doing this? And I'm like, well, it's numerology. And so it really naturally evolved from there, that I started teaching numerology to people to better understand, how does my energy work? How do I work with energy? How do I navigate the energy around me to be successful in business? And those entrepreneurs, in the beginning were very like normal businesses. There was like a brick and mortar eyeglass company. There was a company that was a construction company doing renovations. There was multiple people in finance and sales for like real estate and mortgages and things like that. So very like normal businesses, but they couldn't deny how working with their numerology created efficiencies, made things easy, reduced the amount of like uphill struggles they would face. So many times in business, we're given this advice of like, this is how to market, or this is how to, create a customer journey or whatever. But it's that guidance is being given through the lens of someone that's running a certain code. So it works really well for certain codes, but it's not going to work really well for you if your code doesn't match that of your teacher or your mentors.
Okay. So like I understand like astrology charts and I understand human design charts and I understand that there are ways to, but I have no idea when you say we have numerology charts and you would look at people's, because I've never heard of this, Meaghan. Like you are the first human on the planet and I'm 45 years old who has said to me, there's something called a numerology chart that is your own personal coding. So like when you go and you say I run like your numerology chart, like, again, this seems so natural to you. I'm like, how did you even learn that there was such a thing? And what's the difference between all the other charts and this one?
Well, so there is a numerology chart and you can use numerology for different things. The two key aspects I teach are your birth chart. So it's your energy and how you run it. And it's based on the day you were born and the numbers of the day you were born. And there's lots of different calculations you can do to understand what number patterns you're running at certain phases in your life. And there's certain numbers where, like certain numbers, for example, are meant to be more disruptive. Certain numbers are meant to be more balancing. And I have a business bestie. I'm a ruling number 7 and she's a ruling number 4. And she is able to create the most beautiful, amazing structures in her business because 4 is known for structure and systems. 7 is not. And so I often kind of like fly by the seat of my pants. And she is like, looks at me and she goes, how do you just do that? And I'm like, that's the only way I know how. And I look at her going, how do you create these beautiful like structures? And I can try, but it goes against my nature. And so I have to do it in a much more simplified way to make it work for me. So that's an example, but you can also look at how energy runs over time, right? So I can look at any given day, month, week, year, and have a sense of what is the energy that I'm swimming in. And that gives you kind of like the climate you're in. Like, is it a sunny day? If it is, like, put some shorts on. Or is it going to rain? Like, pack an umbrella. And so you can kind of get a sense of like, what's the energy and how do I work with it rather than sort of pushing it in the wrong direction or like swimming upstream.
So then when you're doing like a numerology chart and you're talking about it like that, are you just looking at like, this is today's date, this is the numbers of today's date, taking that number and then infusing what that number represents into? So like we are actually recording on what I think is a powerful day, right? Because it's like a 404, like does that make it something because it's a 4/4 date?
Yes, it does. So there's 2 different styles of numerology I work with. And one style is what you're talking about, where we would look at the fact that it's like, there's a 4, and then there's 2 2s and a 3. So we would look at all of those numbers. People will identify portals and things like you said by saying, oh, it's a 4/4 day. Ultimately, the energy of today is actually a 6 energy day because April is a 2 energy month and it's a 4 energy day. So it would be a 6 energy day. But this is like all the things I'm talking about is like layering, right? So like, let's use cards as an example. If you do a 1 card pull, that gives you 1 piece of information. But if you do like a
tarot card or oracle cards for those who are maybe, I just want to, like if somebody's thinking about like I'm pulling the Jack of Clubs. No, we're talking about like...
But I love that you said that because that's coming up next. So when you look at a number of its composites, right? Those numbers influence it. So this is a 6 energy day that's comprised of 2 4s. So there's a lot of karma that wants to be readjusted today. And it's going to be around creating new structures that will support us. So today, like if someone's like, what is a good thing for me to do today? I would say, look at where there's been imbalance and figure out what structures will help you to create more balance. And that would be a great kind of aligned action step to take today. You can also look at like where shit hits the fan and be like, okay, there's going to always be shadow traits associated with numbers. And it's not a punishment. It's just okay, what is going wrong here? And how do I learn to work with this energy in order to support my soul's growth?
So I'm going to give an example. if I can, just to see,
Yeah.
just to help anyone else kind of get it. So today, you're saying today is a good day for structures, and like, so I am in the process of, I think I'm closer to like a 7, because I've always been like what I call an upper chakra person, which is easier for me to visualize and like but structures and putting things in tangible is not necessarily my strong suit. But I found these really simplified programs that I really am building some workflows in and keeping it simple. And I was working on that today, and I feel vibrant as hell, right? But this morning, my husband was working, like we're in a place, we're moving, but his office right now is in the living room. And I had a client come in to do like a live session. And so I had to say to him, honey, do you mind working in the bedroom for a hot minute? Because I need the main floor to do this session, which doesn't normally happen. And it sent him off for the whole day, because I think his system, his structure got distorted or shifted or changed. And so then he felt unbalanced. Would that be like me being in the light of it versus him being in the shadow of it?
Well, I think it's kind of looking at it from, it's always to me looking at it from our own perspective. So I would look at it from my own perspective and say, like, how am I feeling about the structures? For him, that might highlight the need for the move and reinforce that the move is a good choice because it's important to him to have his own space, right? And so it's not that he's doing it wrong or anything, or necessarily that it's like bad that he's in that. It's just highlighting like the universe is asking me to create some changes in my life structure so that I can have the pieces in place that support me to be at my best.
It's just because he actually is the one who cleans my podcast. So this is largely for him too. that like, but if you are like, so I just like to let him hear this like little bit as well. Like he is somebody who, when he has this, like he is very set in his ways. Like he loves routine. Routine is, and I'm kind of like being brought to ask, like, but you have to have an awareness to see it through the higher vision, right? Like you have to be able to say, oh, this was disrupted. That must mean Y, right? X happened, Y happened, right?
Exactly. Because if we just take everything for the surface level, it could just be like, oh my gosh, this is so annoying. Why did I have to get upset? And then we start to, be hard on ourselves or create these like kind of downward spirals on ourselves. And in my opinion, there's no such thing as a good or a bad energy. Every energy has its frequency in order to activate our growth. And I always think challenges are initiations. So when we look at a challenge and we take it as like, being hard on ourselves, we're neglecting the fact that the challenge is always going to be an initiation. And yes, like when you go through some hard stuff, it's important to process it. It's important to feel your feelings and all of that. But when you're ready, asking yourself, through this challenge, what is being initiated in me? And you can see it through the numbers, as well as, sometimes self-coaching or working with someone to ask yourself those questions of like, okay, I got disrupted. That sent me for a loop. It's because the space isn't landing right for me. What do I want to do about that? Right? Like you could self-coach through that or, be supported through that. But also knowing the day energy, and if I had your charts in front of me, I could also view it through the lens of like, okay, this is your patterns. And, what's a situation that could help both of you feel more supported through that?
So I have so many questions.
I love it.
Meaghan, my girl crush is turning true. This is great. So we have this like moment where you begin to do and just bringing these like 3 pieces together, doing the numerology for your business coaching clients, right? And then you're researching energy and intuition. So when do these 3 kind of come together and merge into a new path for you?
Well, it kind of just naturally evolved, and that private clients I was seeing started caring more about the energy work than the business coaching. But it's still, I would say that most of my clients come to me because they want to learn numerology to either practice it professionally, or they're already an energy worker or a light worker in some way, and they want the business support or the business guidance. And they may infuse numerology as well. So I think I ended up sort of somehow niching myself as a business coach who teaches numerology, or a numerology coach who teaches business, depending. But at the time when all this was going on, I was going through some massive personal transformations, right? At this point, I'd had 3 children. My marriage of 20 years was like exploding. And when I was going through, my dark night of the soul, intense dark night of the soul, every single day, the thing that gave me a sense of like, I'm going to be okay, was to look at my chart. So I would be like scared, I would be worried, I would be upset, I would be, lonely or sad or all these things. And I'd be like, what's going to become of me? What's going to become of my children? How am I going to sort myself through this? What's next? How do I pick myself up? How do I move forward? I'd look at my chart and I'd be like, okay, my chart shows that this is what's coming up for me. So I'm going to just keep walking. Like that is my next step. I don't know what the future holds, but my next step shows me that this is what's coming. And now I'm kind of alluding to the advanced numerology I work with, which does use playing card archetypes. So when you said like, oh, Jack of Clubs, I laughed because that is numerology system as well. So playing cards are also a divination tool in numerology. So the playing card system, that divination system, the playing cards are actually referred to as the book of truth. You can use that energy very specifically to chart your course. And it is a destined course, like not that your life is like fully pre-planned, but you can see the energetic cycles and patterns that you're going to be moving into. So when I was dealing with a broken heart and I could see I have a business opportunity on the horizon, it was like, okay, Meaghan, focus on your business. If you're struggling in other areas in life, focus on your business. And that was one of the things that got me through it. I also had some stuff come up with my kids, and with my youngest, we have a soul contract. So in numerology, you can also do soul contracts and you can analyze the contract. With my youngest, she's my moon, which is one of the most significant soul contracts you can have, is a moon influence, right? The sun and the moon, they're meant to dance together. And so she was the person who ended up being a huge source of comfort and support to me going through my dark night of the soul, even though she was an infant, and that makes absolutely no sense. But understanding that that's what she was, that's, why her soul chose to incarnate when it did, it gave me that sense of like, okay, none of this is random. None of this is happening to me. This is all a divine order that I just need to learn how to work with and be creative with it and co-create with it, rather than, getting stuck in the dark night of the soul victim mode, which it happens, like, and sometimes we need to go there for a while, but it was the way out for me, for sure.
So I'm fascinated with astrology. It's just something that just has been a pleasure, like hobby of mine, right? And for me, it began just by like, this year, I'm only going to think about full moons and new moons, and I'm just going to like study full moons and new moons, and I'm going to get really crystal clear on them. And then the next time the year came around, I was like, I'm going to add the zodiac energy in, and I'm just going to study which each zodiac sign represents in each of the moons. And then the next year, I was like, I'm going to add in the planets, and I'm going to layer in the next thing. I'm curious, like, because you've been using numerology now for over a decade, or at least a decade, right?
Yeah, probably 8 years. Yeah.
Okay, 8 years.
Yeah.
What has the study been like for you? Like, right from the first just toying with it to like growing it to where you're talking, and I'm like, I'm so lost in the best way and I need to know more. Like, how do we go from point A to point B?
I love it. I definitely started with, like in my work, in my branding, I call it practical numerology, which is the numerology most people are familiar with, which is based on the numbers, like you said, April 4th being 4/4 energy. A lot of people might know their ruling number, which is based on if you take all the digits of your birthday. So for me, I'm February 5th, 1980. I would add up every single digit. Right. And so for me, if you add like 251980, you get 25. Right. And then if you add that together again, you get a 7. That gives me a ruling number 7. So I do have a resource. Any of your listeners that want to kind of have a formula for this, in my Instagram, you can download it for free with the formula, and it gives you a description of the ruling numbers. But if you ever just go into Google of like, I'm seeing 444, what does that mean? They're talking about a numerology system called Pythagorean numerology, which is what I branded as practical numerology. The thing I love about it is it's super practical, super tangible, very grounded. Everything you want to know, you can calculate on the back of an envelope. So I have done people's numerology charts like on the airplane, in a restaurant, at a coffee shop, at events. Like I did markets for a while once. There's a market in Kelowna called the Psychic Fair. I would go and do numerology charts there on the fly, right? And so it's really powerful because you can do it on the fly. And the way I teach it is it's intuitive. So I teach people how to feel the energy of the numbers to interpret it. So you don't need like a book or a resource, right? The other system, mind you, the one with the playing cards, it's very complex. And it requires like advanced formulas to calculate. There's books that you can look it up in, and there's software that you can look it up in. That one took me some time to make sense of. And that's the one where I would look at my own chart daily. I would do my own readings daily. And then I started sharing it with people and, doing my clients' charts and being like, oh, you're in this season. So like, what does that mean for your business? And like, oh, you're coming to me saying you want to do a TED Talk. Look, you've got a window of time in September where you have very strong social magnetism. That's a great time to do a public speaking event, and you can start to identify things like that. And then it just went from there to teaching it.
It's so fascinating because, like, of course, you're like birthday, and I was like 10/20/1977. I think that makes me a 9. Is that a good number?
10/20/1970. So
1977. Ooh, that's not age me.
Okay. 5, 10, 15, 16, 17, 18. Yeah, it makes you a 9. Yeah, 9 it makes so much sense. 9s are known as the mirrors, right? So 9s are beautiful. Why? What's happening?
Because I just rebranded my website with a bunch of mirrors on it.
Of course you did. I love it. It's perfect. Yes. 9 is the mirror. In terms of 9 can mirror any energy back to itself. So it's a great energy for self-reflection. It's a great energy to help other people reflect. 9s are often also hermits. They like their time alone. I know, right? I'm like, for what I know about you, you are a classic 9. The biggest gift the 9 carries, though, is they see things from a higher perspective. So they see things from a higher perspective. They get a good lay of the land, and they can really identify what are best case scenarios. How do we move forward optimally? It's time to let go of X, Y, Z and move forward with A, B, C. And so 9 also is kind of the end of a manifestation cycle. And so it can get, a wrap around letting go, releasing, ending, completion, which is true. 9 carries that energy, but it's not the end and we're finished. It's the end and we're moving into a new cycle, right? So it carries that like death, rebirth energy, which comes from discernment, higher perspective, what's best for humanity. They have very high standards in life, which is beautiful.
Just fuck. That's all I gotta say. That was like, wow, that's me. Like, anyone who knows me at all who's listening to this podcast will be like, that was just really fast, Meaghan, to just be able to pull it out. And that's just using a number, right? Like, that's just giving one number's energy to. So then how do you, because you were talking about like somebody wants a TED Talk, or like, how do you see it from the visionary perspective to know when things are going to work really well with different people?
So usually like when people are kind of like high level, trying to understand who they are and how they move through the world, you can also do forecasting with it, but it gives you a bit more sort of high level forecasting. So like, for example, a forecast for April is a 2 energy month. So talking a lot this month about partnership, connection, collaboration, working together, bridging problems and solutions, and also intuition activation. So those are key themes of April. So if you're, a practitioner or a business owner, and you want to connect with your clients where they're at, touching on those topics will be top of mind to them because it's the climate they're swimming in. It's like they feel the warmth of the sun, and you're saying to them, it's a sunny day, wear your shorts today, or whatever, right? So it doesn't matter what you do, if you speak to the importance of partnership, connection, collaboration, you might choose to run a circle. You might choose to highlight, buddying in a program that you're in. You might choose to run a training on how do you create good collaborations. Like that would be a brilliant masterclass to run in April, is like, what makes a good collaboration? How do we discern in collaboration? Or if you're anybody who does any work with energetics or intuition, recognize that your clients are going to be feeling activations this month. So if you know how to help them with that, if you know how to contextualize it for them, because a lot of times, even those of us who know when we're going through activations, we're like, oh, this is hard. Somebody like help me. Somebody remind me of what I'm doing again, right?
Totally.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to pull back for a minute because I have like questions that are over here, bigger picture, but I want to go back to, so you get pregnant, your intuition, you start to like understand that things are happening intuitively, because I want to paint the picture, because a lot of people who listen to this podcast are at those places where they're curious about their intuition. They're curious about like stepping into a spiritual world. And when they have lived in such a corporate style environment, like what does that look like? What does that feel like for them? I would love for you to just kind of touch on that space of like, you start to know things, you start to research the energy and the intuition piece, which is what you were just talking about. How did you begin to navigate your intuition and building a relationship with it?
Yeah. So I started picking up modalities that intrigued me. And so what I always say to my clients is like, your curiosity, your intrigue, those things are not accidents. Those are breadcrumbs. So if that's something you want to explore them. So for me, I just gave myself permission to try things. I also think that, looking back now, a lot of the people who, when I felt like I was kind of baby in my journey, who I admired and I looked up to as like leaders, or I looked at their gifts and I thought that's incredible, but I could never do that. That was a sign, because now I'm doing that plus more. Right. And so that me seeing them and being like, wow, like, look at what they're doing. That's so cool. I wish I could do that. That was the only permission slip I needed from my soul, was the desire to do it. Right. And so I learned tarot. I learned to work with oracle cards. I started taking classes from people to learn about things like past lives and working with energy. And I just started doing it and working with it, and surrounded myself with people. One of my best friends was an incredible channeler, and I didn't channel at the time, but she was one of my best friends. And I would always be like, can you channel for me? Like, do a reading for me. I want another one. And she would give me as many readings as I wanted. And I was like, this is so cool. Like, I wish I could do this. And sure enough, here I am a few years later, and that's what I can do as well. Right. So, it's just following that. I would say being part of a community where other people are exploring energies and you are safe and accepted to do so. Because I think the riskiest thing for most of us, maybe I'm speaking for myself here, but when I first learned numerology, let's say, or tarot or anything, it was like, can I trust myself to use this? Like, and so to be in a safe environment where I can have a friend or a buddy in my training program where I practice with, like, that practice expression is huge. And if you don't do it, you aren't going to anchor anything in. Right. And so life just slowly evolved that literally all of my friends are magical beings now. And this is what we would do on a random coffee shop date, is we would do some level of magic together.
Which I love. And did you, because I know some people have the story that there was like that, some people did get into that loneliness because if they've surrounded themselves with people who don't believe or don't dip their toe in higher energetics, that there's like, for me, it was like I had to release those who would not encourage what I was doing and navigate finding these like-minded communities and friends and people. Did yours just naturally evolve, or was there a little dippy?
Well, I mean, I would say that my friends, I developed them as I practiced because they were people I was going to circles with, right? So I would meet them at a meditation circle, I would meet them in a tarot class or whatever. And so we would be friends. But to be completely honest and frank, like, my marriage broke up because of this. the final straw of my marriage was my ex-husband leaving because he was so horrified that I was doing a tarot spread one day. And that was the end of my marriage. So I definitely know it's a challenge. And thankfully, I always had a circle of girlfriends around me who encouraged it. I mean, I know it's a fear, but I would say that whether you're going down the path of exploring your magical gifts or, whatever, or anything, we all go through those life phases where like, oh, I finished school and now those friends have drifted, or I started a new job and those friends have drifted. Or for me, becoming a mom, that was probably one of the biggest ones where I had all these friends that didn't have kids and all of a sudden I had kids. And it was like, I felt super lonely in that. And so I think in any of those circumstances, to me, it's find a community and reach out. Like, can we normalize being the awkward person in like adulthood who's like, hey, you seem cool. Can we meet for a cup of coffee or can we go for a hike? Like, can we normalize that?
Amen, sister. Amen. I mean, I think I came on strong because you were like, hey, do you want to have coffee day? I'm like, tomorrow? The next day? Like, I just want to be your friend, Meaghan. That situation. And I'm like, oh, look at me. I'm like, I'm that person. But I think it's true, right? And I think especially in these transitional times when, you're seeking to align with a new community, there will always be that awkward space. There will always be, the way that I like to think about it is like, as your energy is elevating, right? And you are calling different situations, people, opportunities into your field, into your life, you're always going to feel a little awkward. Like, can I just like tell people that spirit told me to do something? Is that like a common conversation? And in the right circles, it is to be like, oh my God, you're never going to believe what I downloaded this weekend. And then be like, oh my God, tell me. Like, but that is an evolution.
It is. And I would say that surrounding yourself with the right people makes it easier to do over time in other situations where you're not sure if it's going to be accepted. Because here's what I've sort of grown to find in my journey is like, there's those safe spaces where like you're in a circle with someone and it's not crazy to say, oh, I had this download or, oh, I saw this, whatever, right? Like that's normal. And so you talk about that, but then you're like, can I share that with my sisters? Can I share that with my mom and dad? Can I share that with my neighbor? Can I share that with the other mom from mom's group? Right. And so you don't know, but when you go into those spaces with this question of doubting yourself, in my experience, I'm more likely to receive pushback. Whereas I've kind of reached this point in my life of completely fuck it. And it's so funny because I'm dating right now and I'm on some dating apps. And sometimes when people ask me what I do for work and I tell them, I get the weirdest answers sometimes, right? And I'm like, great, good screening, good to know off the top that we're not going to jive. But then I get these other people who are like, I've never heard of this before. And I'm so intrigued. Tell me more. And I'm like, my confidence in who I am is being mirrored in their curiosity that this is like, okay, like, let me find out about this. Right. Whereas if I'm apologetic about it, or I kind of hide it a little bit, then they can feel that shrinking energy. Mm-hmm. Right. And it's a journey for sure. But I think, in my numerology community, I really emphasize the importance of community. You will get through this because of your community. And I remember one of my biggest fears actually was because I was very like high achieving in academics, right? I graduated the top marks of my class. I received all these scholarships. Like that was something that was really important to me for a long time. And when I kind of shifted my business into numerology, I was worried that one of my professors who I dearly, dearly love was going to judge me. I was worried that he would think you wasted your master's degree. I spent all this time mentoring you and you're not even an economist anymore. And I was like, oh my God, like I felt bad. Like, did I waste his time? And he reached out to me a few years ago and he's like, would you be able to come to the university and talk to some of my honor students? And I'm like, I'm not practicing as an economist anymore, right? He's like, I know. He's like, I'm a numerologist primarily, right? It's like, I know, I follow you on Instagram. I'm like, all right. So even though I was terrified, I went and we walked the campus before the meeting and he validated me in the most beautiful of ways. He was like, there are peer-reviewed journals that publish articles on numerology. Do you know that? And I'm like, nope, I did not know that. He's like, It's like, so, he's talking, he's like, you could continue numerology and still join some level of academia if you wanted to. And he just really like validated all these choices and was like, and I was like, well, when I talk to your students, what do you want me to talk about? Like my corporate career, my research days, like, what do you want me to talk about? He's like, talk about all of it. Talk about where you are now. I'm like, okay. So I literally talked to these honors students. I told them the journey, but where I ended up is as a self-employed numerologist, and I'm thrilled. Right. So it was interesting. And that was one of my biggest fears. And it turned out to be completely unnecessary.
I love that. I love that. I love that. And coming back to kind of the history of like your childhood and loving money and loving, that impact that it creates for freedom, right? When you are now working with business owners with their numerology, how does it support them actually bringing in money to their business? Right? Because curiosity, like I'm self-employed. I'm like, tell me how the numbers bring me money, Meaghan.
Right. Well, there's a few different ways. Like I certify people in numerology. And so a lot of times when someone's an energy worker or a light worker, it can be really hard to create like a tangible product or a tangible offer. I use Reiki as an example, or EFT tapping as an example. Like people don't always understand, like, what am I going to get? How is this going to change me? And you can share testimonials and you can explain it. But when you give someone a numerology reading before you give them, say, a series of Reiki sessions or a series of EFT tapping sessions, you can show them, here's what your energy is doing, right? Here's why you might be struggling in these relationships or struggling in these aspects of your career. But these are the opportunities in that energy. Right? So we will work with releasing some of the challenges you're facing and stepping into some of the opportunities. And so you can charge for the numerology reading as like, here's like a entry level product with me. We'll take a look at it. We'll figure out, what's what. And then from there, we can plan an ongoing relationship, whether it be coaching or energy work or healing or whatever. And I think a lot of times when people do this work, it's so hard to understand how to explain it. It gives your client something tangible to hold. And I find for me, like, I'll give someone their numerology report and they'll carry it around forever. Like it will be tattered in their day planner. And it's like, they refer to it over and over and over again, because it just gives them that like touch point to come back to. Oftentimes too, people will book on a regular basis, right? So if you're like, how do I get some level of predictability and reliability? It's pretty natural to get an annual numerology reading, potentially doing quarterly updates, depending on how invested they are. And then some people even want as much as monthly updates. So it's like it works in combination with whatever other modality you have going on. That's where I think it's most successful.
So these reports, though, they're kind of guiding principles. They're saying like, this is what you can focus on for maximum benefit towards bringing revenue into your business, right? Like, so like you talked about the woman who was doing the TED Talk and saying like September would be a great time based on that. So it's basically just setting a blueprint for like where to plan or schedule your path of
Totally.
least resistance. Can we say that? The path of least resistance energetically?
And the path where the energetics will support you. So the path where there's already energy flowing, right? And so you it's not passive, meaning it's not going to happen to you. You need to choose to like get in the canoe and float downstream or whatever. But that is the river that is available to you. And I've been using kind of business examples because most of my clients ask me about business type stuff, but you can tell all kinds of things. Like if someone's like, when will I find love? Right? You can talk about that. What's going to happen with my finances? You can talk about that. You like literally any question you could possibly think of, you can get a sense as to what's happening, because the energy can be applied based on what your niche is, right? So I have people who work in relationships. I have people who work in health. I have people who work in business, and they apply the energy in that way, right? So for example, if you were to look at my chart right now, I'm going through a lot of change this year. So if I came to you and I was like, I'm thinking about moving, you'd be like, yeah, change is in your chart. It's not surprising. Or if I was like, I want to travel, not surprising, changes in your chart. Or whatever, right? So you can see this energy, and then you can see like, oh, changes in my chart, and then there's certain flavors of change, right? So this is kind of getting a little bit, detailed, but you can look at like, is this around the way you think about life? Is this around your heart and relationships and the way you connect? Is this around physical assets and tangible material pieces of your life? And so there's a lot you can sort of see, and you layer the blueprint or the framework that the numerology gives you with your intuition and the questions or the queries that your client brings to you.
I think the reason why I like to delve into all of this different nuances is because I work in chakras, right? So there's the overall energetic body, but then there's the nuances of how it influences each of the 7 floors. So I totally understand when you're saying you could go into all of these different aspects, which is a deeper meaning, because sometimes even talking about the relevancy of how they all play out together and individually, and that whole communication between them all can feel like a lot. So I do understand, but then there's people like me who do work in chakras. I'm like, tell me all about the different levels and layers and all the different things.
I want to know all the things.
I want to know all the things. So clearly I need to book a session because I'm so freaking intrigued by this, which I am sure everybody, if you could just tell me who I am by my birthday, I can only imagine what other things you're going to pull out about my personality and my gifts and I just think of everything as like abilities to serve and to support and to raise the consciousness of the planet and to do my active part in this expression of expansion. And so, right.
That's exactly how I look at it too. Because, every once in a while people be like, why? What's the point? And this is funny because this is like me. That's all I wanted. Like, why? What is the point? Why the heck are we even here? What are we doing? Right. And to me, it is about that like soul's growth, soul's evolution, and accessing those deeper layers of soul wisdom.
So can I just end today, and then I'm going to ask you to tell people where they can step in. So what funny thing is, as soon as April started, I downloaded that I wanted to create a membership for empaths to come together where they could actually do their inner work in a collaborative way in order to shift themselves, to shift the planet. And when you were talking about what a 2-month meant, I'm like, well, no wonder Spirit was like, now, do this thing now. Well, you have the energy of the 2 behind you. I thought that was really awesome. So thank you. And I can promise you, I'm not the only one who's going, oh my God, I need to know more. This is ridiculous. Where do they go, Meaghan, to find out more about you, your programs, your readings, all of the things?
Well, definitely come and find me on Instagram or Facebook. We can connect that way. I do have a training coming up, depending on when you publish this episode, on April 17th. We're doing a numerology challenge. So whether you're listening to this before or after the challenge starts, you can still access it by going to meaghanalton.com/abundance. So that would be,
I think if it would actually fall on the 17th. It's a Friday. They come out on Fridays. Oh, it's the 21st that you're coming in.
Okay, well then that's fine. If you're listening to it after, you can kind of do it on your own time, because I'll still leave the access available. But the point of this challenge is to use numerology to help you access your soul gifts and your soul wisdom. So it should be fun.
Well, I'm going to play in the pool. That's for sure. Sign me up. This is amazing. And like I said, for anyone who is listening, just check out Meaghan's Instagram. Like I'm a bit of a person who enjoys a good beauty. Like as a Libra, I love beauty. I love things that are just like clean and simple and just like easy to navigate. And Meaghan, you do that so seamlessly. It's just like, I take a deep inhale every time I see your Instagram account. Like, I'm just like, oh, space. I love you. And that's a good energetic sign too. So I really appreciate you coming in and sharing this. Like, I think that it's such a significant way to simplify the world, because it's so freaking chaotic. And the way that you've just kind of talked about it is just so easy and makes it so easy to navigate. So thank you. Thank you for, again, sharing your light, your vibration, what I call your stardust with us today. I super appreciate you.
Thank you for having me. This has just been such a fun conversation.
Thank you. And for those listening, tune in next week when we dive into whatever is coming up with whomever I'm speaking to. So enjoy the rest of your day, and we will talk soon.